So welcome everybody. Thanks for joining the panel. I know it was lunchtime. Hopefully no one of you falls asleep during the next 40 minutes. We do our best to entertain you quite well. Um, I'm Sebastian Bode, the Director of Engineering at Cardano Foundation, and I have the honor to be on stage with some pretty talented people. And we're going to talk about interoperability and enterprise adoption. And we try to explore a bit how both things work hand in hand together, and also explore a bit why both things are important for the Cardano space. But before we start, I'd like to hand over to my panelists that they introduce themselves briefly and also tell us a bit about the companies you are working for. Marvin, please go. Please go.
Yeah,
first.
I'll get started. Yeah, so I'm Marvin. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Maestro. So Maestro, in essence, is a blockchain infrastructure provider, and so our goal is to offer the complete Web3 stack for Cardano. We offer basic API tools and developer tools to build applications and really streamline the process of powering dApps at scale. From DEXs to lending protocols. In a way, we're like the alchemy of the Cardano blockchain.
Cool. Thank you very much. Then it would be up to you, Ashu.
Uh, uh, I am Ashu, and I take care of strategy and marketing, chief of strategy and marketing at Router. Router has been solving for interoperability since 2020. One of the earliest protocols to even foresee the problems in interoperability. So we obviously started off as a proof of authority bridge, and now we have pivoted into a blockchain-based solution, which of course, in addition to being able to transfer funds, is also able to transfer instructions. So funds and instructions in conjunction obviously opens up a lot of possibilities. Bit about me, worked for 17 years in Web 2 before diving into Web 3, and Cardano was one of the first tokens which I bought in because I came with a heavy enterprise background with Hewlett Packard, Johnson and Johnson. Um, you know, come from a supply chain background as well. So just loved Cardano and still holding.
Thank you very much. Temujin.
Yes, hi everyone. My name is Temujin, or Tam. I am the VP of Marketing at Wanchain. Wanchain, we're pretty much an OG in this space from the same type of era as Cardano, and we've been focused on blockchain interoperability from the start, so cross-chain bridges. Right now, we're the only active decentralized bridge that's servicing Cardano. So a few months ago, we launched the bridges on mainnet. Some of you might have seen a bit of USDT or USDC, also some BTC floating around Cardano dApps these days. So these are bridged there via Wanchain bridges. And basically today, we've connected Cardano to 11 chains. Our entire infrastructure, we service a lot of different chains, so we currently connect about 30 chains, both EVM and non-EVMs. So over the next coming months, you're definitely going to see more assets and more chains being connected to Cardano, basically as we work with different projects and cool people like we have here on stage.
Cool, thank you very much. I'm so happy to be on stage with you together. Let's start with the first part where I'd like to catch up a bit on the past and also about the mission of your companies. So starting with Ashu, I'd be interested in what has been going on in the cross-chain interoperability space in the recent months. Any interesting developments, maybe with router protocol, but also even outside of the Cardano ecosystem? Would be interesting to hear first.
It's amazing, right? Every 3 months there is something new, something very exciting, and I'll start reverse chronological.
Nice.
But I think the latest, I mean, as early as this morning, people have been talking about the intents framework, so which we have been working on for the last couple of months. So basically, if you look at the various ways in which you can bridge, you have mint and burn, lock unlock, and you have liquidity pools, liquidity networks. But broadly, you can either meet the user's needs through on-chain liquidity or off-chain liquidity. Now, the problem with on-chain liquidity is cost and time, because the minimum transfer time between the source and destination will be the finality duration of the source chain and the finality duration of the destination chain, and not taking into account anything. Now, depending on the validation, obviously, when there is a message from the source chain that the user has deposited, so obviously that message has to be validated with through validators or relay or oracle in case of Stargate. And then the same thing happens on the destination side. Now, if we could have market makers, which we can call them as forwarders, who are able to meet these liquidity needs off chain, and the settlement happens later through optimistic verification or reverse verification. That significantly crunches the bridging time and cost. So router Nitro, which is right now in testnet going mainnet in 3 weeks, is going to be 60%, at least 60% cheaper than any of the incumbent bridges because it is using this flow. And as of this morning, Axelar has started talking about it, and Across has been working on a similar architecture.
Okay.
So right now, I can confidently say that Router, Axelar, and Across are using this architecture, and obviously it will find adoption with other bridging players as well. Um, yeah, now this is like as recent as it can get.
Cool.
But yeah, if we go back a little bit, initially it was just funds or asset transfer, and then we said that okay, we need NFTs also to be moving across chains, and then we said okay, funds plus messages need to go along, funds and instruction transfer, because if you are holding Ethereum, if you're not holding Ethereum but you want to participate in Lido or Stader ETH and you're holding some other token, currently it is 8 to 12 clicks for a user, assuming the user knows everything. That what is the APR, what is the most trusted bridge, what is the aggregator that I have to use, how do I toggle, which wallet do I use. Assuming that the user knows everything, it is 8 to 12 clicks on the UI. Now, if it can be achieved in single click, which is only possible if funds and messages can be transferred cross-chain, that is a game changer. So that is the larger picture that we are working on, and I mean not just us, but a lot of players are working on. So this is what is happening in the bridging phase.
Okay, interesting. Thank you very much. Tim, when it comes to interoperability, I think the term standardization is not that far-fetched. So I heard when we did the prep call actually for this panel, I talked to Weijia, and he told me that you are also pretty active in the Ethereum Enterprise Alliance, as well as in the IETF, where standardization is discussed when it comes to cross-chain interoperability. Maybe you can give us a quick overview about whatever it is that's in our ears.
Yeah, I don't know if the audience is getting that too, but we just got a big buzz.
Yeah,
Okay, now it's better.
it's good.
So maybe now you can start.
Sure, yes. Basically, OneChain self-identifies as a R&D company first and foremost, and a lot of that is because of these relationships to firms like the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance and our role within it. So OneChain's VP of Engineering, Dr. Zhang, so he's also the head of the interoperability work group at the EEA and kind of leads their kind of efforts to standardize cross-chain technology. And obviously we're talking to more of a Cardano audience than an Ethereum audience. So the EEA is basically Intersect, but for the Ethereum world. So this is also kind of, I'll get to that in a second, but a reason why OneChain is also kind of interfacing with Intersect these days to also try to help bridge, the standardization work that's happening on the Cardano side as well as the standards development that's happening on Ethereum side. But that's really the core mission here. So right now I agree with a lot of what you said. There's definitely these shifts from token transfers to just message passing. There's also, in my opinion, compromises starting to be made by a lot of projects where they're more willing to accept different centralized components within the bridging infrastructure. We'll talk about that later, I'm sure, because that's mostly to service enterprises. But basically right now where we are with interoperability is we can build anything. We can bring any specific asset or piece of data or message from one chain to another. That's actually not that difficult right now. The problem is that because we don't have these industry-wide standards, all of these solutions have to be built ad hoc. So yes, if you come to me and say, I want to do this very specific thing, no problem. But it's not really scalable in that way. We need these standards for it to be scalable, for it to be a little bit easier, for it to be more seamless, and then we can kind of start talking about real adoption. One thing example I like to give is, in the Ethereum world, again, you have ERC20 tokens. If this standard for this token didn't exist, yes, you could build a DEX, and if you wanted to allow, a swap from one token to the other, and they had different standards, you could tweak your DEX at the infrastructure level to be able to swap these tokens. But because we have these standards like ERC20 where everyone abides by, now you can just go and, punch in your contract address, and no matter, who minted that token, you can now swap it. This is essentially where we want to get to with bridging, where it's a little bit easier and you don't have to do all this kind of changing the actual infrastructure of the bridge to support new types of assets.
Thanks, Tim. coming back to Cardano, one of the challenges that we as the Cardano Foundation also see is the topic of enterprise adoption. Because I mean, we might have the most beautiful blockchain out there, the best protocol, the best governance, soon to come in 2024, hopefully. But if no one is using our blockchain, I guess it won't remain a sustainable system at all. So that's actually why we are super excited about products like Maestro, which claim to be the complete Web3 stack. That's what I saw on the website at least. So please tell us a bit about where does this come from, what is the idea, and what kind of maybe early successes did you already have during the last year?
Yes, I mean, Cardano is great, but it was also a paradigm shift, right? At the core, how to do accounting. UTXO is fundamentally different from EVM. And so that means a lot of the standards and a lot of the maturation of the tools that has been going on the EVM side for years, don't really port over to Cardano. And so that's why I think Cardano, people say it's hard to build on Cardano, is because as a developer, we feel the space hasn't really standardized or matured in a way. And so Maestro is really there to streamline and increase accessibility to builders. We're really interacting a lot with builders and help mature the space so that people know, okay, how do I do coin selections? How do I query UTXOs? How do I interact with this blockchain? And come up with standards together. And that's really the first layer, right? But after developers, then you start dealing with businesses, and more enterprise. And that's where you can start going up the stack and abstracting more and more away into things that I just want to buy an NFT, right? I just want to be able to do a swap. I just want to do these things, and I don't need to understand the intricacy of UTXOs or EVM. Enterprise cares about functionality. They care about creating value for their users. Very soon, people won't even care on what blockchain all of this settles, right? They just want something that works. And so we need to get to a point where it's not about Cardano, it's not about EVM, it's about creating products that solve a real world problem. And that comes with building higher and higher level of abstractions that kind of hide the complexity, but then make it easy for people that even know nothing about Web3 be able to use those features to do cross-border payments and to do voting and all kinds of stuff. And that's really the vision. But when we mean the full stack, is we understand that in technology everything comes as a stack, and the higher up the stack, the more people you can impact. And so as we move up the stack, we will create, will become a space that's more welcoming to more and more people, and really help our space go mainstream.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
That's why Maestro won Battle of the Builders yesterday.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah, congratulations again.
Congratulations.
I couldn't agree more. It's just so important that we onboard also all those legacy businesses that might be still a bit afraid of blockchain because of the technical complexity, or even of other levels of complexity. But looking back at the cross-chain interoperability, I don't know if you get annoyed if I touch on that topic, but I'd like to touch on IBC, because it was one of the first attempts to standardize that field, maybe a pretty hands-on attempt, and probably certain aspects of bridging different networks have been ignored, at least with the first start. But Ashu, can you tell us a bit how relevant is IBC still for Ruder protocol?
Very relevant, but we are agnostic to Cosmos, right? We don't use the Atom token. Now, we have to look at things like IBC and Polkadot parachain architecture with a sense of purity, right? They have provided a way with which universal interoperability is possible, right? So from router's perspective, when it comes to Cosmos interoperability, we can blindly use IBC. But when it comes to Cosmos to EVM interoperability or Cosmos to non-Cosmos interoperability, there are two factors. One, whether the destination chain is supporting IBC, and two, if it is supporting IBC, what is the cost of validation, right? If it is not supporting IBC, then we will have to have a proof of stake framework to validate the transactions. So IBC is relevant, yes. Now, if you look at what is happening in the Ethereum ecosystem. So it is acknowledged universally that Ethereum is not scalable, and therefore you will need scaling networks. You will have Polygon, you have Arbitrum, and even these scaling networks, they don't fight amongst themselves. They say that, okay, there is a traffic jam here, so we will build a flyover and shift the traffic jam to the next signal, and then there is a congestion there, we'll build another flyover. So these flyovers, started with Polygon, then Arbitrum, then Linea, Base, Mantle, it just goes on, right? And it is going to go on, right? Now, what is less important is the L1, L2 to coexist, with Ethereum being the final settlement layer, right? But what IBC has led to is the theory of DApp chains, DApp chains. So the L2, L3 framework. So now if a person is building a DApp which has a very high TVL, and for some reason, see, look, Cosmos chains become inefficient the moment you go more than 140 validators. And that's a stretch. On an average, you will have no more than 50, 60 validators. Now, if a DApp says that no, my users, for my user security is of utmost priority, where is 300,000 validators of Ethereum and where is 60 validators of Cosmos? There is no comparison. Similarly, proof of work in case of Bitcoin brings in altogether different layer of security, right? So with interoperability protocols like Router, what we work on is an additional security module. So which gives the power to the developer to select the security framework. If they are happy with IBC, sure. If they are not happy with IBC, then there is Router Chain's own validators. If you're not happy with that, go on use Ethereum's validators through EigenLayer. So people who have staked ETH, they can become validators for this DApp. So every DApp becomes a blockchain and has the choice of choosing validators, and that is the relevance of IBC.
Cool. Thank you very much. Just adding on this, and for Tem, question for Tem. So enterprises can have the choice with Router protocol which kind of security mechanism they want to choose. I think enterprises are also interested in maybe choosing that their data stays private. And so for enterprise adoption, maybe even the topic of zero knowledge enabled bridges is interesting, but I also heard that it might be challenging because if you bridge a private network that is privacy enabled with the network that is public and permissionless, seems to be not the most straightforward thing that you can do. Is there anything where OneChain is struggling with this or looking into how to deal with those challenges and wishes from the enterprises?
Sure, yeah. I think you really touched on the big difference between bridges that service the retail users and enterprises. So enterprises have, they're actually not new to the topic of interoperability. They were, to be honest, very, very early, exploring blockchain, how to use it, as well as how to make it work for enterprise use cases. And when they started, it really seemed to be more that they had this vision where, okay, I, enterprise A, am going to run the blockchain, and all of my partners are going to come on my chain, and we're going to transact there. And then what they discovered is, okay, no other enterprise in the right mind wants to do that. Just go and put all of their data on someone else's chain. Everyone kind of wanted to spin up their own blockchain, and they all wanted everyone else to come to them, and it wasn't happening. So then the kind of conversation started shifting, like, okay, maybe we need to explore the public networks again, because we tried it fully private, it didn't work, didn't catch on. So now they're looking at the public networks. But then you have things, like you said, issues of privacy. And so really what is being revealed is that you need some sort of interoperability between permissioned private networks and public networks. And certainly this is a challenge. There's regulatory challenges, which probably I'm not the right person to speak to. We need some real legal experts there.
It's unfortunate.
Yeah, but there's also some technical issues. And these can be solved with like zero knowledge proof and things like that. And I think this is really the direction we're going to have to go to, at least right now, for enterprises, until you truly have kind of industry-wide standards, which frankly we're still quite a bit years away from that, frankly. But then once you do kind of start plugging in this private to public infrastructure, which is not a problem that is unsolved. This is solved. We can do this right now. Then you can finally start living up to the early promises of blockchain that we used to talk about back in 2016, how it was going to revolutionize supply chains and things like that. Back then, we were probably envisioning it like, okay, everyone's using it on one chain, everything's trackable, huzzah, we've solved it, but then no one was down for that. So probably what you're going to need is kind of a multi-chain architecture. You're going to have on one layer, a private chain, permission chain. Here, you'll have the kind of supply chain players, and they are going to have all the data that they need for their supply chain, but the only people who have access to that are those who are directly involved in the supply chain. Then you're going to have a secondary layer. This one's probably your regulatory chain. Here, no enterprise in their right mind is just going to hand over all of their data to the government. They're just going to hand over the minimum data so that they can be compliant, because everyone wants to be compliant. So here, you'll have still permissioned, but it's the supply chain, the people who are participating in the supply chain, plus some regulators who are only being accessed, accessing the data that the regulators need to see. Here you have an interoperability layer that's taking it from that original chain, maybe atomic swapping it, only the specific data you need to the secondary permission chain, where then the regulators can, access and grant the licenses and everything that they need to do. Then you'll have a third chain, and this is the public layer. Sometimes, retail users do have an interest in a supply chain, for example. Probably the most talked about low-hanging fruit is kind of like tracing the origin of your wine or your goods. And so, this is something that users do care about. So this is something that is does make sense to have on a public chain. Similarly to the earlier example, you'd have that first chain that has all the data, who would then use an interoperability layer and publish only the relevant information that the end users need to know to the public chain, and that's available to everyone. So you do have these kind of things in place, and this is doable right now. It can be built. We're just slowly kind of waiting for the enterprises to kind of get there. It's no longer a technical problem. It's really just regulatory, and then also making the business case.
Got it. Thank you very much. Marvin, talking about interoperability does not only mean that you have to bridge blockchain networks, but also within a single ecosystem. We have, for example, in Cardano, the CIP mechanism, where we're trying to standardize how certain things are done. So was this relevant from when you built the Maestro platform, when you designed it? Did you look into, okay, which kind of CIPs are already there? Are we actually also trying to set new CIPs probably because we want to influence how others are building, so to assure that there is a certain interoperability between different systems that might solve similar problems? That would be interesting to hear. And in the same time to hear how much did you rely on open source software when you were building Maestro?
Yeah, starting with the CIPs, CIPs are really important for us, right? Because they set a lot of standard of how data is stored and displayed on chain, and a big part of Maestro is indexing that data, right? We are at the core, we are a blockchain indexer, and then we serve that on-chain data through APIs. And a great example is around tokens and NFTs, right? There are clear CIPs that allow you to parse that metadata, and there are different standards that we need to follow. And obviously, NFT marketplaces or DEXs want to have that metadata accessible. And sometimes, the CIPs are evolving. Before we had those on-chain NFT metadata, we actually have a centralized metadata for tokens and NFTs with a token registry. So then we have to also juggle between old standards and new standards and be able to bring those together. So the challenge is also how can we support not just the new standards but the legacies, because everything that has been done before will be on chain forever.
So
and so maintaining multiple generations of standards is obviously a challenge, and we'll never get those standards right away. And so that's where the challenge comes from. Regarding your second question with the open source software, it's very important. It plays a big role in what we do. We use open source software, we contribute to open source software, but we also build in-house software. So it's finding that right balance, and that's why we're actually one of the founding entities of the CBIA, the Cardano Blockchain Infrastructure Alliance, and that's an alliance of the top infrastructure providers on Cardano and infrastructure players, and a lot of these people are authors a lot of the open source libraries that we use on a daily basis, and it's really important for us to coordinate together on understanding, okay, we're all users of this open source software, but we are also servicing hundreds of applications downstream, right? So when we have new nodes coming in or hard forks coming on Cardano, it's happened in the past where these hard forks actually break open source software, which then can not just affect us, but affects hundreds of applications downstream. And that wasn't too much of an issue, a year ago or 2 years ago. Now the Cardano dApp ecosystem has completely transformed,
Right.
and so it requires a lot of careful coordination, right, and communication, not just with users, but also upstream with the foundation and with IOG as they push for hard forks and updates to the nodes. Can the authors of all those open source software have enough time to upgrade these tools so that we reduce the downstream effect on the ecosystem? And it's always a challenge because in most companies, where things go wrong is around communication, and this is especially true in a decentralized system. It's all about communication, and even at the code level, it's very important.
Yeah, true, fully agree. Ashu, does a bridge necessarily have to be decentralized, or is it also okay if a bridge is not decentralized?
No, we believe in decentralization.
Okay.
Because anything that is not decentralization is not true to the philosophy of Web3 and blockchain. Decentralization is necessary.
Cool, sounds good. What do you think, Tim?
I think for retail users, decentralization number one. This is to the ethos of blockchain as a whole, as we all know. Right now, as I kind of hinted at before, there's some compromises that other projects are making right now to attract the enterprise use case. There was recently a big announcement where even Layer 0, who's one of the big leaders in interoperability, they partner with Google Cloud to kind of take that piece out. That's a totally centralized component, but it's done so to assuage, the concerns of the enterprise. They will see Google Cloud there. It's already, they'll inherit that trust, and you'll have this type of compromise. Potentially, this is okay, I think, for some enterprise and government use cases. And then there's also some edge cases where, for example, sometimes maybe the data itself is centralized, so adding a kind of decentralized layer on top of it maybe is a little bit meaningless. One example I'd like to share is, we kind of have to zoom out. So a bridge is not just moving like value from one chain to another. Bridging is just really moving data from one chain to another, making sure you can call functions from one chain to the other. In many, many ways, an oracle is also a bridge. There's not, really fundamentally that much different between a token bridge and an oracle, like Chainlink. So Chainlink, way oversimplifying it, they have a bunch of nodes that are voting on the data, and then enough of them agree on the value of that data, and then, okay, we're putting that on chain. This is what we're using now for all these applications. Now, that's great for things like, let's say, Bitcoin price, where there's all sorts of different markets, and okay, they'll have an algorithm to weigh it according to liquidity, et cetera, et cetera. But it probably makes less sense when we've reached a kind of level of mainstream adoption where, let's say, the London Stock Exchange they themselves putting on chain the price data. In that case, I don't want a bunch of nodes voting on what the London Stock Exchange is saying if the London Stock Exchange is willing to go on chain and just in a centralized fashion just put it on chain. So you have to think about these type of things as well. But I think what we definitely cannot give up is to create the ability to do it in a decentralized way. That's my biggest concern, is that we'll start making too many compromises, and then at some point we'll make a compromise that we can't unwind. The core technology itself has to, in the first place, be 100% decentralized and permissionless. And then for specific use cases, if it makes sense, we can start exploring which elements of it can be centralized.
Got it.
Yeah,
Thanks.
interestingly, you mentioned about layer 0, right? There is a lot of community pushback from all the communities around the world, right? First, they use a relay or oracle architecture. Now, what most people don't know is most relayers are oracles, most oracles are relayers. So how do you rule out the probability of collusion? Second, we were talking about standardization. So Connect has been pushing for XERC20 standard, which is a standard, cross-chain like ERC20. Then Layer 0 was supposed to use XERC20, and they were in discussions, and then they announced their own standard. So at every opportunity, they are kind of bordering towards centralization, whereas bridging itself need not be centralized, right? One can understand the enterprise needs of sensitive data. Enterprises having their private blockchains. Of course, there have to be private blockchains. There are sensitive information around the world.
Right.
But what is important is how does that data interact with public, right? If you look at some of the DApps being developed on Cardano, like I was reading up on the educational certificates being stored on chain, right? That itself need not be public. the validation of that needs to be public, and the interaction of that is supposed to be possible with any public or private blockchain in the world. Because where do you need to show your educational certificate? Either to get a passport or to probably get a job at Google. So in which case, I mean, obviously the Cardano Foundation cannot force governments around the world to use Cardano. It's their prerogative. Similarly, one cannot go and push Google and Microsoft to accept a public blockchain. So it is the interaction between the system which is having these educational data, validation, which happens in a decentralized, trustless manner, and relate to the end user of the data. So bridging really doesn't have to be centralized. Information, I mean, it's the privilege of the enterprise or the government.
Right. Thanks, Ashun. Marvin, so I understand Maestro is kind of bridging the gap between Web3 and Web2, maybe you can say this, by offering API services that sit on top of a decentralized ecosystem to make it super easy to consume. Don't we run into a certain threat that we again, because that's also one of the points of critics towards Alchemy, that we run into a centralized world again, because just because it's more complex or you have different consumption patterns of blockchain data, all that you're doing is installing another centralized layer on top of the actual decentralized system, like Maestro, maybe. So how do you take care of that, that this is not going to happen?
Yeah, so as infrastructure providers, well, we are data providers, and often data providers benefit from economies of scales, and that's what we've seen with Alchemy, right? They are able to power a lot of these applications because they're able to acquire and service that data at scale efficiently at low cost.
Right.
The question is, do you care that you get your data from 1,000 different people? Or do you care that the transactions that you've built is verified by a decentralized network, right? And especially on Cardano, right? The verification is done on chain. The building of the transaction is done off chain. So it's about finding that right balance of, do I want to decentralize every single step, or I'm willing to get my data to get the state of this contract and the state of this wallet, build my transaction off chain, right? And make sure I get what I want. And if I'm trying to do something fishy or not give the right data to my users, well, as soon as they send a transaction, the transaction will fail on submit, right? So the transaction, you just cannot make it on chain if the data is invalid. So there's no incentive for us to send invalid data because it would just not even make it on chain. It will be instantly rejected by the blockchain. So that's where this kind of like off-chain computation and on-chain verification really brings the decentralization to what matters, which is the validation of the state transition. But how you get the data, I think maybe is not going to be too critical, right? In like how you get it. Obviously, having a competitive environment of multiple data providers is important, and I think that's why I think Maestro plays a role. A lot of the apps traditionally were powered through Block Frost,
Right.
and so we're trying to bring a bit of that competition, right, and have a diversity in the third parties that are offered, and the users will choose, to the providers that they want, and there will always be, self-hosted solutions. So some dApps and projects we talk to, they're like, actually, we run our own indexing in-house, right? We run our own nodes, and they trust their nodes. So it's more about choice and giving people the choice to pick what they want. But to me, at the core, because the contracts are validated on a decentralized network, there's very little room for these data providers to really, nudge our clients in a certain direction.
Cool. Thank you very much. We are almost running out of time. I still like to give the word one last time to each and every one of you. Just maybe with 2 or 3 words. Where is Cardano a pain when it comes to whether building bridges or any other service on top of it? And where does it actually is better than other ecosystems? Maybe we start with Tem, please.
Sure. So that I can end on a positive note, I'll start with the negative. So when we were deploying the bridges, we worked hand in hand with IOG for over a year to be able to get it to mainnet. I would say the most difficult part was just dev docs. I know this is something that is already actively being improved, and it is improving. But at that time, it was quite difficult to find, the information that you needed to build these type of solutions. And the kind of best thing about Cardano, honestly, it's the community. We ourselves have already learned, something just in the few months that we've been bridging to Cardano, and how the Cardano community views interoperability, and they're not inundated every day with what's going on in the Ethereum world, which is where we originate from and where a lot of the blockchain industry is focused on. So kind of having what is still a very rich and large and powerful community that doesn't have all these built-in biases that you might find in other ecosystems such as Solana or Ethereum. This is really something that's special about Cardano, and it's really something worth protecting.
Thanks, Tem. Ashu, 2 words, please. Or 5.
Community, absolutely the strength, and not too worried about the technical part, because if our team sits on it for 3 months, we will bridge Cardano to others.
Great. Thank you very much. And Marvin?
Yeah, to finish, I think the difficulty has been bridging, and I think right now we're getting to a point where it's finally happening. Cardano has been an island for a bit too long, and we really need to build those bridges and bring liquidity cross-chain. For me, a big strength of Cardano, and we see it more and more, is actually liquid staking. Cardano has the best staking architecture in the space, and it's maintained a truly decentralized layer 1, which I think will pay dividend in the future. And we see with Mainnet already, where now computational layer or partner chains can now borrow the staking and the security of our liquid staking and our stake pools. It's fantastic, and I'm really excited to see where this goes.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to the panelists and also to the audience. And that's it. Talk to you soon. Bye.
Great. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.